the skies, beyond the skies, you and I were breaking bounds, breaking bounds. Beyond the skies, you and I were breaking bounds on Baobab.
Hey, hey. How is everybody doing? Thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this conversation. My name is Muthoni Waigwa, and I am in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'll be taking us through this discussion with our lovely guests. So I'm sure some of you are wondering what this topic is. It is storytelling and narrative, amplifying African voices. From the chat, I see there's some from Kinshasa, some from Lagos, some from Ethiopia. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. Continue dropping it in the chat where you're from. I truly appreciate you for joining. So I am an African woman fulfilling my childhood dreams. As a young girl, I was so captivated by TV and film. I would watch TV shows or films, and I just knew from a young age that I wanted to be part of that world, creating stories, whether be it in documentaries, animations, films, TV shows. I knew I wanted to be in that space. And with that, I co-founded a company 10 years ago called Nifty Works Plus Limited. And over the years, we've created content for organizations, NGOs, you name it, we've done it. But we've recognized that there's a gap in the market for video on demand services. And as a business, we are transitioning into that space with our own video on demand platform. So be on the lookout. So today's conversation is about discovering the power of storytelling in African creativity, both steeped in tradition and thriving in modernity. We want to explore how storytelling has the ability to shape perceptions, challenge stereotypes, and provide a resounding voice to those who are marginalized so that their voices can be heard. African storytellers are rising, and they are bravely taking room in their respective creative spaces. Today's guests are remarkable women who I have been watching make incredible strides in their creative spaces. They will be sharing their creative journeys and insights on the vital importance of amplifying African voices in today's global conversation. As we have this conversation, please drop your questions in the chat. We'll be looking out for them, and then we will answer your questions towards the end of this discussion. In no particular order, our first guest is Shirleen Wangari, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya, an actress, writer, producer. She has acted in MTV Sugar, BBC's First Grader, Netflix's Sense8, and Tahiti High, and other programs. As a writer, her works have been showcased at Cannes Film Festival and Durban Film Art and other spaces. She produces commissioned work and independent work with collaborations across Africa through Blackwell Films. She has an upcoming film titled Act of Love, which premieres on 20th October 2023. Welcome, Shirleen. Say hi to the audience, and thank you once again for being here.
Hello, everyone. As Muthoni said, I am Shirleen Wangari, and I'm glad to be here, sharing my story and hoping to inspire African writers, African storytellers to tell their stories.
And our second speaker is Binja Basimike, all the way from Democratic Republic of Congo. She is a connector, digital marketer, foodpreneur, investor, and former healthcare business systems consultant. Since making her move from Boston to Kinshasa, she has established multiple ventures in her city: Kivu Brand Architects, Diaspat, and Unwomanly Media, which produces a podcast titled A Series of Ants. Through these ventures, she engages with African creatives and entrepreneurs in the pursuit of the development of this continent, starting with her home country, DRC. Welcome, Binja. Say hi, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. I hope you all can hear me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, as we kick off this conversation, we're here to be inspired by your journeys, be inspired by the works that you've done. And just for those who are joining in, today's topic is storytelling and narrative, amplifying African voices. So I'll start with you, Shirleen. Could you share with us your creative journey and highlight how traditional storytelling has influenced your path towards becoming an actress and producer? Unmute.
Sorry for that. I've always wanted to be an actress since I was like, since I knew actors existed. So I knew the path I wanted to take since I was a kid. And I started acting for sure immediately after high school. As I was going to college, I was acting. And then as a kid, I was actually watching Shaka Zulu. I'm sure it wasn't for my age rating because of the violence that was involved, but I really, really, really loved the story. I really loved the setting. I loved the heroism. And I was like, okay, you know what? When I grow up, I'm going to be acting in such movies, such series. So here at My Nation, I'm waiting to be called to audition for such a role. And the call has not come. And I'm wondering, how come we don't make such movies? How come we don't shoot such? Later, I came to learn the budgets are very big for such period pieces. But then I couldn't kill that fire of such stories, the African heroism and whatnot. So I wrote my first script, an African tale set in 1800s East Africa. It's a love story. And I submitted it to Durban Filmat. And I don't know how, because I was no expert writer, but it was selected for pitching and whatnot. So I went there, and I don't know what pitching is. Yeah, I've just written a script, and I pitch an African tale. Sadly, it did miserably because I didn't know what I was doing. So I learned, oh, I need to be a producer in order to pitch properly. I was like, okay, so how do I learn how to be a producer? I got online. I got into master classes. I got into workshops. I think I've done maybe like 10 workshops on just being a producer, and learned how to be a producer. And so the confidence grew. And I wrote a script that was selected at Cannes Film Festival. So that one, because I could pitch at least. When I went and pitched, we were number 2. When I came back into the country, a director challenged me and told me he had this period piece of the 1600s about the Sultan hero of Mombasa, who actually ended the occupation of the Portuguese in Mombasa and the Eastern African coast. So I was like, sure, I'll do it. And when we are still ongoing in that project. Why I am into this kind of storytelling is because when I watch like foreign movies and foreign series, like let's say American series, I see about the Navy SEAL and its heroes, like they never die. And if they die, it's a big deal. I don't know any Navy SEAL in real life, but I feel like they're probably one of the most powerful people ever. Why? The stories we've been told have amplified that. So I feel in Africa, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to tell stories that show how great we are, how creative we are, how much we have to give, because we are human beings with so much to give, So those are the kind of stories I want to tell. The heroes, and not just the heroes of the 1800s and the 1900s. I want the heroes even of today, because they exist. So yes, that's the kind of storytelling that has inspired me, and I want to pour out there to the world.
You've mentioned Navy SEAL, and I remember how my father was, and he still is, action, fanatic. He sees an action film, he's just like, I want to watch that. So I totally relate with that, where it's just those stories have been perpetuated over time, where it's like we've been conditioned to just know that Navy SEAL stories, action heroes, that's what we should be watching. But as you said, are we seeing ourselves taking those roles? Are we seeing ourselves taking these hero stories and seeing those stories set in Africa? But to just flip the coin and just tie in with the direction that Binja has taken with her initiatives. So for you, how was it growing up, and how did you recognize that you wanted to take this path as an African creative? And what narratives or wisdom were poured down to you from previous generations?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. And this platform is incredible. So everybody who joined in, thank you so much. My story is very convoluted. I don't think that up until about maybe 2 years ago, I saw myself as a creative per se, because my entire other life was lived in the sciences. And while there is a specific art in the science itself, I don't think I had recognized that we are all creatives. And so for me, my journey, as mentioned, it was a little bit convoluted. I was brought up as one of 7 kids. If you ever meet a Congolese person and they're less than like 5, just know those ones, they're modern ones. And so for us, storytelling was really how we connected, how we got to find community amongst ourselves. And as the middle child of like 7 kids, it's always fighting for my voice to be heard. And so I think for me, my earliest memory of storytelling was, as many of us as Africans here know, when the lights are gone, somebody starts telling you about how their day went, and you're just captivated because it's not like we have so many other things distracting us. And I think that's really my earliest memories, around like a campfire with like my grandpa back at home in the village, and he's just telling us about what it was like when he was young. And you just get so fascinated and like sucked in. And I know our lives today are much busier, etc. But I think for me, the fact that they always say, for as long as like the hunter tells the story, the glory is always going to be on his side. I'm highly paraphrasing the tale, but I think growing up that's kind of how I learned to value storytelling, because at the end of the day, if we don't tell our own stories and if we don't share our own experiences, then others will be the ones doing it for us. And I think that's what I have been doing throughout my life, but not in the sense of calling myself like a creative per se. And so for me growing up, it was always either my parents or my uncles saying, well, how come you didn't speak out? How come you didn't say what happened? And I think I was always encouraged to speak out and give my side of the story, so to speak. And so being able to sit here now, so many years later, it's been so interesting seeing the evolution that is me as a creative, and that is all of us actually as Africans, who are all very creative. And so the wisdoms that I've gotten have really centered around the fact that there's so much value in being your own spokesperson, because nobody can tell your story better than you. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but I'm sure we'll dive deeper.
What I'm hearing from both of you is making sure that we get our voices heard, that we speak up. And for you, Shirleen, being in the film industry, it's male dominated. So how do you ensure that your voice is heard and that your notes, like, being a producer, you're giving back your feedback, that your notes are implemented and that they're carried throughout the production?
Wow. Yes. Most of the directors are male. It's true, especially here in Kenya. So when you're a producer, of course, you and your director must be very in sync. Otherwise, that movie or series burns real quickly. So I found that I tend to shoot. I've built relationships with the directors that I work with. Like we have something in common. Like we want to tell particular stories. There's certain narratives we want to tell, and we find that we are actually on the same page quite often, despite the fact that I'm a female producer, they're a male director. So I think honestly, it's building a relationship and understanding each other, and coming from like the current movie that I'm about to premiere, it's about a woman. Like, and I don't think a man can really 100% see that kind of story inside out unless you research heavily. But the director is male, and he did a great job. How? He actually listened. He listened to the writer. He listened to me, the producer. He listened to the actress, the lead, because she could say, I don't feel that. So I'd say it's actually relationship, building relationships. Yeah.
Yes, relationships, from director to cast to crew, all of you have to have synergy and be able to understand each other, but also be flexible, because things change along the way as you produce and as you put together a story like a film. But for you, Binja, all the way in DRC, it's an emerging market, and you having established these businesses, someone might see you as, lack of a better word, a newbie, so you shouldn't be listened to, you shouldn't be heard. So how do you ensure that your voice is heard in these various spaces that you're in, and that you are also amplifying other female voices in your space?
Yeah. Thanks, Muthoni. That's a very complex question, but it is literally my lived reality. So to start, I think to answer your question in a more holistic sense, I kind of have to go business by business so that you can actually fully understand what it is I'm doing and how I am really the newbie, but really pushing for amplification here. So I'll feature two of the three businesses that I have established here in Kinshasa. So one is Unwomanly Media. Unwomanly Media, just as the name says, we are breaking all bounds that have to do with who a real African woman is. We are literally unwomanly. That is in our name, because we realize that because of so many stereotypes, which are stories that have been told about African women for so long, African women are seen through a specific lens, and that generally keeps us in a box. Whereas when we look outside, when we look beyond our borders, we see that women are really able to push boundaries. But yet here on the continent, we're seeing, one woman here and one woman there. It's not the norm. It's more of kind of like the exceptions are what we find and that we marvel at. And so at Unwomanly, what we did was decide that we're really going to make women the center of everything that we do. So we are a media company that focuses on amplifying the voices of African women. And we do that through podcasting, through a video production, and through a digital magazine. And so all the people that we talk to on one of our podcasts, for example, a series of Ands, it is specifically geared towards African women under the age of 45. And these are all entrepreneurs, founders, women in the C-suite. And we talk to them, and we're actually going into our third season. And so that's kind of how we've been able to start amplifying the voices of these women. I was recently talking to somebody over in South Africa, and she said, well, how does it feel like to be in this industry that's, male dominated, and you guys are, our business is about a year and a half old now. And she was like, you guys are newbies, you're in a male dominated industry. And literally it was the first time since launching Unwomanly Media that I actually thought about the fact that media is male dominated, just because we're so woman centric in our organization, in everything that we're doing. And so for us, it's just to be purposefully biased and to be intentionally biased against, for, I should say, women. We're not against men, we're just for women intentionally, in terms of our hosts, in terms of our content. That's one of the ways in which we've been able to do it. The other business that I launched here in Kinshasa is called Kivu Brand, and we're a content creation agency here in the city. And basically what we do is we work with local content creators to be able to tell Congolese stories. So it's more of like a Congo to the world type of a deal. A lot of our clients are international brands, and what we've been able to do is just tell stories by us, for us, because a lot of times external international brands, especially like you mentioned, Congo is an emerging market, they want to come and just copy paste. And so you will drive down the streets in Kinshasa, for example, and you'll see billboards of like white people on there. Again, love me some white people, but like Congo is like 99% chocolate. And it's very complicated whenever I try to sit down with clients and I'm like, your messaging is not going to hit because people don't see themselves in your visuals. And it's something as simple as that, like the story you're telling visually is not in alignment with who you're talking to. And so Kivu Brand is the name of the agency. And what we've been able to do for about 2 years now is being able to just encourage the local creators who are the storytellers to speak out, right? To use their voices, to use their creativity, but at the same time, encourage international and local businesses to start valuing Congolese stories. And putting value means you put a dollar amount to it and not just ask for free content or we'll do an exchange of service type deal, because art has value in it. And unless we put a value on it, the Mona Lisa is only valuable because we see it as valuable. Our stories are only as valuable as we give them value. So I think for us at Kivu Brand, it has been really essential for us to value the artists, value their art, and ensure that the partners that we have in terms of clients, etc., are understanding the same of us. That was clear.
Yeah, that was clear. You know, one thing that has stood out for me is the billboards that have a different color, yet majority is chocolate. So with that, Shirleen has an upcoming movie for those who are joining in and missed that beginning part, titled Act of Love. And I think it premieres next week, and I'm so excited for her. This story is an impact film. And I just want to touch upon this, Shirleen. How is this film challenging stereotypes and amplifying voices of young women, youth, or any other marginalized community?
Wow. So, Act of Love. Okay, let me just give you a small, like, background. It's actually a true story. Our writer wrote it from a true experience that she went through. It's directed by a male director, despite being a female story. And it's a passion project that we've worked on for the last 2 years. So finally sharing it with the world is probably one of the most exciting things I'm doing this year. It tells a story of a very resilient young woman, because I mean, life is life. Things happen, okay? How you get up, how you dust yourself and keep walking is actually what counts. So that's the story in this particular film. How we challenge the stereotypes. I remember when I was talking to the wardrobe person, I was like, okay, this girl has gone through something. Yes, she lost her job. But I don't want to see her dressed, I don't know how, because she had good clothes before she lost her job. She's highly educated, by the way. She's very eloquent. Like we see her in one of the interviews in the film, but please, if you never come through on the 20th at Parklands, Anga Cinema, and watch, you'll see. We hear her, the way she talks during an interview. It's not, because I feel like in most cases, when someone sees a broke African, they think, oh, you're not educated. Oh, like you're backward. You know, there's not much going on for you. But misfortune happens to everybody across the globe. So I feel like in this particular film, we challenge that, because when you look at our lead, if she was not, say, in her house, you would not even tell like exactly where she lives, because we have painted a strong woman who we're not trying to go like, okay, there's a word we use here in Nairobi, like wishy. No, it's just something happened to her and she's dusted herself and she's rising again and she's fighting for another day to like to thrive. So I think we did pretty well. So, but you have to come see for yourself, please. Yes. And then you'll tell us if we did well or not. But I think we did. Yeah.
such a big production requires finance. And, for you, Binja, trying to make sure that these stories from Congo go to the world, get financing. What challenges have you both faced in fundraising or getting the resources necessary to produce your stories and put them out to the world? We can start with you, Binja.
Okay. I think I am an Anglophone, Francophone, and even saying that is a clear indication of how colonization has hit us all. So I was living in Boston in the States for the last 12 years before I moved home to Kinshasa. And I was in tech in Boston, so I know what it looks like to fundraise, to have an idea, put it together, fundraise, and apparently money just shows up. So me and my confidence, I said, even for me, let's do this at home. And I realized very quickly, I must add, that funding in Francophone Africa and funding in Anglophone Africa is completely, these are two different worlds. Where I saw Google, Twitter, or X now, Instagram, Spotify showing up in all of these countries. If y'all are not paying attention, there is no movement in Francophone Africa. I think if there is anything, it's within maybe the last year, maybe two, and it's probably Senegal or Morocco. But basically Congo, where we're about 80 million French speakers, yeah. Getting funding is, I don't even think a struggle is the word. It is incredibly difficult. I mean, I am a minority of minorities, and still, for me, putting out a grant, even in terms of requirements, you'll see some grants are country specific, and Congo is never going to be on that list. And it's not a fault of us as people who live here, where it's not like we're not creative or we're not trying. We just don't have the same opportunities to even show up at the door. If the application itself doesn't even allow you to select the country, you've lost before you even attempt. And so it's been incredibly difficult to fundraise here. What has actually worked for us on the Kivu brand side has been the fact that I had some savings because I worked in health IT consulting, and I have parents who were we have a room that you can be in as you establish this business. So they have kind of helped me out in that sense, but it's literally been self-funded from the get-go because, again, who is funding African women in Congo? And it's not who is funding African women, because plenty of people are funding African women, but African women in Congo, and it's an organization that is not a non-profit, because that's different, because the UN would love me if I was out here saying I'm going to do this for, a specific group of women in the eastern part who are more affected. I'm just a woman with an idea that needs funding. Getting that support has been incredibly difficult. And then for Unwomanly Media, it has been an interesting dichotomy because my co-founder is from Liberia, which is also another country that is barely registering on anybody's funding maps. And so for us, we've also been self-funded. But I think what we've been able to do is, I always tell some of the folks that I mentor, when you go to university, you learn how to learn. So we've literally just been bootstrapping in all ways. Our website is something that we build, our social platforms we run on our own. And we got our first grant from Microsoft, I want to say maybe 3 weeks ago. And it wasn't even a financial grant, because they were y'all look like you have it together. And I'm no, we just really know how to put our lives together, guys. I don't understand why we need to kind of portray this idea of Africans who are completely struggling. I mean, for my co-founder and I in all our business, our the bare minimum is excellence. So when you go on our website, you'll see it and you'll think, wow, I wonder who's designed it. But it's literally just us. And it's not, again, not for a lack of putting in the application. I'll give you an example, Muthoni. One, or it was an Italian organization. They were having a boot camp in Rwanda. we put in our application. They loved what we did so much. They went on, they were like, oh, this is wonderful. And then they said, but we can't fund you. You guys are too advanced for what we're looking for. And I'm like, guys, we are trying to give you African excellence, and it's almost penalizing us in a way where people are like, oh, you look too put together to need funding. And I'm like, so I should have just come to you with an Instagram account, and then you would have considered me for this. And so we've kind of had those challenges in our journey where we find that we're either like overly prepared and overly delivering in terms of what an African startup needs to look like, versus on the Francophone side where it's like, it's just crickets, you know, unless I am out here tilling the land in agric or creating an app on something or helping, you know, in a war-torn zone, I barely have any funding to say, to show for. So I am a very transparent person, and I can tell you it has been extremely difficult to do so, and not for lack of trying. That's my experience.
Yeah, and I don't get it why we have to show ourselves as struggling, and you know that we you know, we don't know what we're doing. Please come and help us, and help us put our ideas together. And that's not right. And I guess that's why we're having this conversation today, shaping narratives and amplifying African voices. Because I mean, if brands like Spotify, Twitter are not penetrating Congo, then that means the rest of Africa is still behind. Just because they have a presence in other countries doesn't mean that they're making progress. Progress starts when all of us are moving forward and all of us are rising. And for you, Shirleen, you said this project for the film has taken you 2 years. And, you know, with production, every item has a cost. How have you been able to raise the funds? How have you been able to bring your project to this point? Because as Binja has said, as myself also in this creative scene, financing is difficult, and fundraising, you know, is just sweat, blood, and tears.
Wait, okay. So we had some fortune in this one, eh? We had to pitch we had to pitch to get funding, yeah. So my team and I, we pitched, and we did get the full funding to run the production. But of course, it is not enough. So getting most of the people on set was calling favors. Like, hey, I got this much, but could you just come and give me like your red and just shoot for me for the next, like, say 6 days, please? And someone looks at you and goes like, what? How much kind of money I'm paid like half a day, and you want to offer me for 6 days? Are you on drugs or something? And we're like, okay, please. But anyway, guys came through for us. But we were financed by some Fine Picks, a German entity, and they did they gave us even more support, also introducing us to other people. So we are really, really grateful, because that one, they held our hand. I will not lie, this was a good production in terms of getting, I think, the basic financing and getting some good direction. We also had people like DocuBox who came through, because at some point funds ran out, because contingency, I think, should be 50% of the budget when you're filming. As we are, contingency was like 5%. So 5% usually runs out in the first, before you even hit set. So DocuBox came through for us. We are so grateful, and they didn't, like, it wasn't a struggle. So we're so grateful for that. But in all honesty, as Binja is saying, the funding thing, like in Kenya, you do find that there's so many opportunities. That's now one thing I feel like we're blessed with. There's opportunities to apply for funding, yes. But as a creative, I feel like sometimes it limits you, because you're told this is the kind of story you have to be telling in order to get this kind of money. So you find, oh my God, I don't have that script. I have Shaka Zulu. Would you like to finance Shaka Zulu, perhaps? No, we don't finance Shaka Zulu. We want to finance, I don't know, climate change or something, you know? So basically, I feel that the freedom, despite the opportunities to apply being available, the freedom to create what you want to create is kind of limited. And at some point, I think I speak for all creatives, at some point, if you don't create what you're supposed to be creating, there's a drain. You just start feeling drained. You start feeling like you're doing NGO jobs. And I remember when Nuri Kahio, our famous director, I watched her TED Talk once, and I think she mentioned this. Like, there was no joy in doing that. She wants to create, she wants to tell bubblegum stories, like happy African stories. She don't want to get money just to tell sad African stories. And you might find most of the funding is geared towards that. So that one doesn't really work for me. But in all honesty, still, despite them being available, applying is an uphill task because, I mean, we are applying so many people, and it's the entire Africa that's applying. So you find that you make like 50 applications, you get like 2. So if you do not have some resilience in you, if you don't have a backbone in you, you're gonna crumble real quick. Yeah.
Ladies, thank you so much for your honesty. And it's true. Why would I, as a creative, want to be put in a box and told this is the story that you can tell? Then it beats the purpose of me being a creative, where I have this idea and I want to bring it to life. Or as you're saying, Shirleen, you have this script for Shaka Zulu. I want to produce that. And it's interesting. I remember going for a script lab in Berlin, and I had written my story. And the script advisor was like, this isn't African enough. And I had a moment of reflection where I was like, who gets to decide when a story is African enough or when a story is speaking to the African audience? So what are your thoughts on that, ladies? Who gets to decide what is an African story? And as creatives, how do we, lack of a better word, protect our stories and ensure that we are shaping and managing the narrative of what Africa stories are? Any of you can go.
I mean, like I said earlier, I think that I know for a fact, I stand on that 10 toes down, that we should always be the captains of our own ships. And Africa is not a monolith. I think that's the issue when you've had so many people outside of Africa tell Africa's story for a long time, because then you come and you meet other types of Africans who've had different life experiences, and all of a sudden you kind of have a cognitive dissonance where you're like, well, how the Africa I know is this level of poverty, but you're showing up looking like this, and you're telling me that there's happy, regular stories in Africa, like you call them bubblegum stories in Africa. And all I want to see, because then it also feeds me and my ego and it aligns with my bias, is Africa suffering, right? Because that's a tale we know, because that's the tale that has been told for a long time. But I think it gives it even more importance. It makes what we do as something that is even more necessary and even more critical, especially as we're moving along the years, that we now start telling African stories loud. And I think that's part of what normally media does, is we tell those stories loudly. We are here to, the word is amplify. I think that's also part of what we are doing today, is to amplify those stories. Not only should we be telling them, but we should be standing on rooftops and on top of skyscrapers and yelling them out. And not only yelling them out, is making it something that is commonplace to see Africans as successful, to see Africans as people. Not everybody is out here struggling, to see Africans as people who are thriving just as much as our counterparts outside of our borders. I think more than ever, it's incumbent upon us as Africans to be the ones standing on these rooftops saying these out, because at the end of the day, if we continue to let other people tell our stories, they are always going to be telling it from their perspective. And like I said, nobody tells your story better than you do.
For you, Shirleen?
Oh, me. Okay. In all honesty, you just have to be stubborn. You have to be extremely stubborn and decide you're going to tell your story. And you're just not going to back down, because if you back down, so yeah, you will tell someone else's story. you will tell someone else's story if you back down. So just be stubborn. Chances are you're going to lose some financing. Again, inspired very much by Wanuri. There was a Sundance, I think, webinar, and she said when she was raising money for Rafiki, because it needed quite a lot of money, because she needed a certain standard of picture to be done. She lost one financier because the financier wanted the story to go a particular way. Not an African financier, someone else. So she was like, no, I wrote this story a particular way. I want it to go this way. And she was told, okay, that money, sorry. So I think you just have to be stubborn and tell your story. And you might lose on some big funding, which sucks, by the way. So, but eventually you will win. Eventually you will win. Yeah, if you just stick to it. That's what I think. Yeah.
If I could just add one more thing, I think it's also important for us as Africans to no longer look at life as being like, I have to live this for me and my family. I think a lot of times where we fall short is that we don't think in terms of legacy. And I think it's incumbent upon us, even though like we are people who storytell and our stories are oral and they're passed down from generation to generation. I don't know that we look at it purposefully in the sense that like, if I don't correct this narrative today, my children's children are going to have to suffer through whatever stereotype has been built around us, whatever story has been built around us and who we are. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to really think generationally. The reason why we're talking about 1800s and we can sit here and talk about Napoleon is because the French, they made sure that everywhere they went, the story of Napoleon went with them. Why is it that Africans, everywhere we go, we will assimilate and just take on their stories and our stories kind of die away? And I think it's also incumbent upon us. We can only point the finger so many times at somebody else. It ends with me. Everywhere I go, in what I wear, in how I talk, in what I like. My story as Binja is going to be an African story, and what that is going to be passed on generationally, and it's going to be told from my lens moving forward. I really think it's incumbent upon us as well.
Yes, thinking about it generationally, because if I'm sharing my story today, it should go down to various generations. And one of the things why we're still remembering Shaka Zulu is because they did it well. They continued telling that story until today, that we are still talking about Shaka Zulu. And I just want to read a comment in the chat where it says, from Lydia, she says, Africa, that construct needs to be stopped. Uganda alone, where she comes from, has over 50 tribes with distinct languages and culture. So I think now the power of storytelling in that is preserving heritage, preserving these different stories of each tribe, preserving each culture, and there's power in that. So there's a question here where the person, she's called Vivian, says, we always hear of inclusion in the male-dominated industries. The preaching to include more females is strong, however, men are feeling attacked. So as a lady, in your quest to rise in that area, do you need a special quality? Who wants to pick that up?
Do you need a special quality to make your voice heard? Yeah, it's called just continuing to be an African woman. I feel like at the end of the day, I've only ever worked in male-dominated fields. So I was in health IT consulting for about 8 years, worked exclusively with women. I was the only Black woman in African in most of these spaces. So for me, I think I have always known that for you to make any advances as a woman, you have to continually shake tables. You have to continually bring your own chair. And also, you also have to make the right male partnerships. I think it'll be very short-sighted of us to sit here and say, yes, build your own table. But then if they don't even let you in the door, you know what I mean? Then your table will be outside. And so I think it's in those 3 tiers. I hope I'm responding to this question as I understand it. Where yes, while the places might be male dominated, I think we should never lose sight of the value that we add to the conversation, the skill sets that we bring to the table. It's not like they're doing you any favors. I think we need to always keep that in mind, that it's not a favor, that it's not that they're allowing us because, you know, poor women they haven't been able to do so. No, it's you're coming in with skills. You're coming in with a perspective that is needed. So even in our approach, I would hope that as you're looking to get into these fields, or if you're thinking about it or whatever, I would say go in knowing that you are worthy to be in those spaces, that the tables needed to have been there before you got there. But at the end of the day, if they're not, you still deserve to be there and you should push through. You know, try and find the male allies. I call them champions. I always had male champions, especially in tech, who made sure that people didn't see me as like the secretary walking in, especially because I was a Black woman in America, child. So to be able to know that they're like, oh no, she's actually implementing the system you want. And everybody's like, oh, I guess we should stop asking her to be taking notes because clearly I wasn't doing that, guys. But I think it's just knowing who you are, walking in that, and really being unapologetic and pushing, as Shirleen said, it's really being stubborn in nature until you get there. It's going to be hard. I don't think anybody needs to be selling you any dreams, but it's absolutely worth it, because once you walk in the door, you leave that baby open for the other women coming behind, so it's not as difficult for them.
I agree. It's all about collaborations and fostering relationships, even with our male counterparts, because as you said, we may make the table, but the table will just be outside the room. So we need them too. So for you, Shirleen, what's your vision for the future of the African creative industry in the years to come? What's your vision for that?
Oh my goodness. I've met some of the bravest people, my age mates, younger even, and they're pushing the boundaries. No means nothing to them. Like, there's some few people I've worked with, and I wake up with a complaint. I'm like, oh, we can't do that because we don't have the red camera, or we don't have the RE. And they're like, what? We have a Canon. We go on set. Let's go shoot. Okay, we shoot with what we have. It's a story we're telling, and I think such people are. It's a revolution of sorts. It might not be very loud, but it needs to get louder actually. But I feel like there's a generation that is actually making things happen. I've seen people leave the industry. A lot of my friends have left, and I respect that. Yes, I respect that. If it's not taking care of you at some point, perhaps it's okay. But there's people who have refused to quit, and so there's going to be a revolution at some point. Right now, it's very slow and very quiet, but I think it's going to get quite loud. And like here in Kenya right now, we used to premiere like 2-3 movies per year. Even 3 movies is a miracle. I cannot believe in 1 month there's like, I don't know, 6 premieres, 8 premieres in 1 month. This month of October, there's so many premieres happening. That's a revolution of sorts, but we can't, it's not loud enough yet. So I feel like the creative industry in Africa at some point is going to take over, because I like that the foreigners are actually taking our stories and making our stories. Yes, that yes, they might not make them like we want them, but they're coming here to look for our stories. That means something. That means we've got something, you know. So we now need to empower, to empower ourselves one way or the other, and tell those stories ourselves, because you can imagine how authentic they're going to be. So I have nothing but positive vibes about it. I see only good happening. Yep, but it still needs there's still some ice cubes in that fire that need to be removed so that this fire can catch on properly. But if we keep going in that direction of resilience, persistence, and trying to tell our authentic, original stories, I guarantee you eventually the fire will catch on, and the world will have to respect that that's a bonfire right there.
Yes, the bonfire will catch on, and they will not ignore us. They will have to pay attention. And for you, Binja, Francophone market, What's your vision for that space?
I think I like to practice optimism to the nth degree, because I think we as Congolese have lived in so much despair for generations. It's not just my parents. We've lived through lots of war, and I'm from the East, where there's always some noise, as they call it, happening. And I think it's time for just really put our hands to work that excites us and just to go with it. Because I think our default status has always been despair. And I think that has hindered us from so much, because it's blocked opportunities. It's projected an idea of what Francophone Africa is to the world that has now, many generations later, ended up impacting us, even in terms of funding, like I talked about earlier. And so I like to say we have to be recklessly optimistic. I think we are where we are, but there's only so much about this that we can cry about in terms of spilt milk, and we have to just keep moving. I think the one thing that I do every day when I wake up, I'm just like, one foot in front of the other, because that's how we're going to get it done. And again, if I choose to pick up and go, then who am I leaving behind? And I think very much in terms of legacy, in terms of impact. Spotify will only come to Congo because they know, oh, there's that one girl who speaks both English and French that we can talk to, and she can let us into the market because she has the know-how. If I leave, and if people like me leave, then we're back where we started off at zero. So it might be difficult, and it is going to be complicated to get through, but somebody has to be there to do the grunt work. And if that's me for this generation of my lifetime, then for that moment, they're bearing the brunt of it all, so to speak. And so that anybody coming in after me is more successful. So that's where I sit, just practicing reckless optimism.
So I'm going to, Shirleen, you have something to say?
No. I was just...
Okay. So as we wind down this conversation, two things stand out for me is resilience. Whatever spaces that we find ourselves in is to be resilient and to put one foot in front of the other. And also, as we are creating our stories, as we are amplifying these stories and voices, think about it from a generational perspective. If we're still talking about Napoleon and we're still talking about Shaka Zulu, it's because someone ensured that that story was preserved and that story was shared down the line. So ladies, as we close this conversation, what is your last remark or anything that you want to still share with our audience?
I can go first, and then Shirleen, you kicked us off, and then maybe you can close us out. So this week on our podcast, A Series of Ants, we talked to a female South African chief data analyst at FNB Bank. And she mentioned something that has arrested me since we talked. And she said, when God shares a vision, it's not a conference call. A lot of times we sit back and we're waiting for people to affirm what we're doing, for people to join us, for people to say, yeah, you're doing a great job. But I think being a creative, and then being an African creative, only you know the vision that you have. Only you know exactly where you're trying to go. The how, you probably will need to get your partners along the way, but only you really carry that vision. And I think for so long we've cheated ourselves out of the vision for the sake of saying, okay, let me just go and get a regular office job because this is hard, and oh, nobody's funding us. And those are real things. But I think holding on to that vision, because at the end of the day, you know that the impact that vision is going to have is going to be beyond you. I think as African creatives, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to future generations to really just hold on and to really just push, because others are doing it. They may have more resources, but nobody can tell a story like an African. So hold on to that vision.
Love it, Shirleen. Yeah.
Okay, here goes. So, what I can tell my fellow African creative is, again, I think I'm repeating myself, but you just cannot back down. You cannot quit. If you believe truly there's something that must be told, I believe that you cannot allow yourself to be influenced and back down. Eventually, what will happen, and I'm speaking from experience, the world will conform. It will conform, and your story will be accepted. But you might get hurt, you might lose out for a while, but your story will be accepted. So that's what I would tell my fellow creative in Africa. And also, again, like I said, if you're in Nairobi and you do not come for my premiere on 20th October, Anga, Parklands, Diamond Plaza too, please make it for my premiere, because I want you to see what can happen when African creatives come together and create with love and with so much hard work involved. So I would really appreciate it if you came. And if you miss it, you can just go online on My Movies Africa, and you will find the movie immediately after the premiere. So you're very welcome. I would appreciate.
Fantastic. I'm just dropping your trailer and for Binja, her website for Unwomanly Media. So I just want to thank everyone who showed up tonight, or daytime or lunchtime, wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for participating. And truly, let's continue having such conversations, because it's in these spaces that we encourage each other and we forge a way forward in this industry. And also we get to pick out insights that we can use in our day-to-day activities and ensuring that our stories are preserved and are passed down to future generations. So once again, thank you and have a wonderful weekend ahead.